traits is that where the vast majority of the electorate is unfamiliar with even a few of those characteristics as between various candidates, how can we consistently get these traits in our judges?
Okay, does anyone want, so this is a little bit of our template to begin with. We're taking exception to that? Could this work at some level and not others? Remember, some of the states have a mixture of the two. You wanted to protect the sub-circuit, but you weren't so protective of other levels. So speak to that, if you will.
Well, if I could just say real quickly that what you just heard was you're going to have 11 people send 3 names to the governor, and those 11 people are going to be chosen by the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, the Attorney General, and at the same time you're saying you want to take politics out of selecting judges. You've put politics in it, and what you've done is you've taken the people out and put a very small, select few group of people in. Judge DiVito mentioned people not found qualified by the bar associations, and what I would submit to everyone here is that those 15 judges who were convicted in Gray Lord, all 15 of them were found either qualified or highly qualified by the state bar and the Chicago bar. And they're the same kind of judges and same kind of men who would find their way through this process. So I think you insult the people when you say I can't listen to 2 or 3 people speak and think I can determine which one might be fair, which one is honest, which one is out for himself. I think they've made excellent selections these last 20 years.
Okay, so let me pick up on this question of political involvement. And this is for any of you again. If a group of political leaders are making the initial recommendations to a governor, where do you get the experts, so to speak, from the legal world? Where do they come in to assess them and rate them from the standpoint of the criteria John was mentioning? I mean, who gauges that? You're not suggesting that should the people that are selected by the Speaker and the Senate President, should they be from a pool of law professors, law firms? And I mean, how do they impose the standards?
The pool would be wide open. Anybody could apply. For 10 years, I've served as the chairman of Chief Justice Tom Fitzgerald's committee evaluating candidates that he was considering appointing to the bench, both circuit and appellate court. And I know it can be done. When you bring in the candidates, you get their bar association material, you learn who they are. The role of the bar association evaluators would remain just as it is now, probably even better, more intense. The bar would be higher than it is now and than it was during Gray Lord. We could aim for the highest quality judges possible. And in that way you review the history, the experience of the candidates. The real power in the merit selection system is in the hands of the Judicial Nominating Commission. And John Thies and I have described a bipartisan system, recognizing that in any system there's going to be politics at play. Politics is at the forefront of our current system. It's everything. If the nominating commission appreciated that the appointer, governor, Supreme Court, let's call that person governor, was not appointing Republicans, not appointing African Americans, not appointing gays, not appointing women, the Judicial Nominating Commission could give the governor 3 such people, forcing the governor to choose that person, that person carrying those characteristics. Anthony Young talks about diversity. The history in this country concerning merit selection is that it creates greater diversity. Greater diversity. I concede that the sub-circuit system has been extraordinarily successful in creating diversity, but frequently at the expense of merit, of electing, as I said before, people deemed to be unqualified by every reviewing bar association, where the people really don't have a real choice.
Well, let me get back to something Anthony Young, he raised maybe one of the key issues, which is that the history of this country is that you only get diversity not at the end of the barrel of a gun, but through some sort of pressure tactic. You have to change something systemically to actually create diversity in a political world. How would you make sure that the bench is diverse? Would you have to set up a quota system? Would it become like a set-aside program where you had X number of people, women and minorities? And if you start doing it that way, then don't you lose the concept of merit if you're being driven by the diversity piece? In some ways, isn't it easier just to let the voters make the diversity decisions in the sub-circuits? I'm just playing a little bit of the devil's advocate here. John, what would you say? How do you create a diverse bench? Do you just leave it up to these panels to do the right thing?
Well, as Gino said, the history of merit selection across the country is that it has increased diversity. So I don't think switching to that system is going to change the question of diversity. I think that the focus should always be on merit. Everyone should agree with that. And we, through the kind of system that has a thorough review of credentials, we can get the best qualified judges. And I want to also go back to what Gino said at the very beginning about we have some remarkably qualified judges in the current system, and I wouldn't deny that. And I'm glad he said it, so I didn't have to. It's almost by accident that it happens, because we've seen so many where they really they got there for the wrong reason. The other comment I want to make is that I am a downstate lawyer, so I'm president of the entire state bar association, not just the one that lives in Cook County. And so we should not simply look at this from Cook County's perspective. We should also consider how this impacts people all over the state. And even as a downstate lawyer, where in theory we have a better chance to listen to the 2 or 3 people give a speech, it's not happening. And if it's not happening in Champaign County, which is 130 plus thousand people, I can't believe that it's happening up here. So we shouldn't forget that this is about the whole state.
Let me ask a yes/no question before I get back to something more. The yes/no question is merit, or should it be all merit? Should it be all elected, or should we come up with some blended system? So let me just go right down the line. Which of the 3 do you think makes the most sense for the best judiciary? Merit, blended, or elected?
I would say merit, and if you do blended, it's only from a political reality standpoint.
In other words, you might have to blend for politics.
Yes.
Okay. Anthony Young?
Everyone knows I'm for the election. And if I could just say, Andy, you mentioned, how do the experts come in the merit selection, and we talk about experts in bar associations, and I think that's one of the biggest misnomers. The experts can certainly tell us who the best trial lawyers are, who should handle this case, who should attack that legal issue, but I don't think the experts are the ones who can determine who's going to be fair, impartial, independent, and bring integrity. I think the people can do that just as well. I compare, like, the very best baseball players don't make the best managers. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player, hasn't done too good with selecting others. So these expert panels, they may be experts themselves in the legal field, but they're in my opinion, they can't choose integrity, impartiality, and fairness any better than anybody in this room.
Okay, let me just make sure I understand something, Anthony. So you favor elected across the board, not, I mean, I know you want to protect the sub-circuits, but you want to keep it elected at all levels?
Yes.
Okay. Brian?
So I'll defer to my colleagues specifically on merit, but if I could also say, you know, I believe strongly in our democratic system, and I have faith in people to vote. I think part of the challenge that we're having is that we don't have the tools for folks to make the right decisions. And so, I mean, there's a few things that can happen. Voter guides, for example, is one thing that I would really like to see happen. We at ICPR actually have a voter guide that we put online as well. The other is performance commissions. And so we've been working of the pilot project with a partner organization, Chicago Appellate, to where our board and our staff are actually evaluating judges and trying to get that information out. So I think we need to look at the challenge that merit selection creates, because we need a constitutional amendment. And are we there? Do we have the political will for that? And if the answer is yes, then this conversation makes a lot of sense. If we're not quite there, what other things can we do so that people downstate as well as here in Chicago have the right tools to make the decisions and be engaged in one of the three branches of our government?
Gino, DiVito, all merit, blend?
All merit, and I just want to add a little bit more. Right now, approximately half the judges in this state are appointed, not merit appointment, but they're appointed. They're elected, as it were, by the circuit judges to be associate judges. Half the judges in the state. In Cook County, those judges are among the best because the judges have done an outstanding job, putting politics aside, being very conscious of diversity, all of those considerations, and considering merit primarily. But merit is not the underlying aspect of that system. As for the other judges who ultimately run for office, a high percentage of them are initially appointed to that office by the members of the Supreme Court. And so they have an edge in gaining election because they run as sitting judges. And again, the bar is lower because merit isn't necessarily the standard applied, but they begin the effort to be elected by being appointed. So that is part of the reality in this state, that a very high percentage of judges are appointed, but unfortunately, not under a system which gives priority to merit.
Okay, so I think we've done a good job with looking at the two sides. There'll be some questions, but before we get back to questions, I want to switch in a minute to the other issue, which is money in judicial races. But before I do, for those of you who think we need a merit system, and this would probably be John and Gino more so, can you give the audience and me a sense of how we get there? In other words, it's been 42 years since that vote was taken statewide to keep the elected system, and there have been lots of bills over the years, and Brian points out, bills that change these sorts of things tend to languish somewhere in Springfield, probably a janitor's closet, or if not, someplace else. But is there a roadmap for getting a vote or getting this on a ballot, or is this the kind of thing that's never going to rise above a certain level because of the politics? And since you had the State Bar Association, what's your sense of that?
I think you take one step at a time, and I think it's very difficult. The political reality is that it's very difficult to make the kind of change that we've been talking about, maybe ever, but hopefully someday it'll be easier. But in the meantime, we need to take one step at a time, and that's why you do things like what Brian has said. We address recusal issues. The Supreme Court rule, the Code of Judicial Conduct, 663C, we should be modifying that to take into account the significance of campaign cash on the perception the public has of the judiciary, which is why at the Illinois State Bar Association We have a committee that is working very, very hard on proposals that would ultimately go to the Supreme Court that would revise the rule on recusal standards. So you do things that hopefully try to address the perception problem that we have that's not in anybody's interest. And along the way, you hope for a political climate that is more receptive. You don't want to have to go through another Gray Lord. And that actually is what was at the background of our association coming forward with this very specific proposal. It was Gray Lord.
You know, you're really not asking, I mean, is it really that insurmountable to convince lawmakers to simply let the public make this decision through at the ballot box? I mean, Anthony Young has confidence in the voters, so, I mean, why not put this on the ballot 42 years after it was defeated and see if the same outcome prevails, or if it's a new day? Would it make? I mean, is it that unreasonable to push that?
I don't think it is that unreasonable, and there are experiences in other states where you might have said what I just said a moment ago about how difficult it is politically to get it done, and they have somehow succeeded. One way is to carve out particular areas of the state, which on my side, we don't really want to have to do that. We don't think that's good, but that's one way. It happened in Missouri, of all places. Missouri was the first state, by the way, to have merit selection of judges, but there were certain areas that weren't covered by it, and they were able, in an area that had been seen as so hostile to the concept of merit selection, they did have some success, so we shouldn't throw in the towel.
Anthony Young, you have faith in the electorate. Would you have a problem with the electorate weighing in on this overall question on the ballot as a referendum question?
My question to you and everyone is, why ask that question on the ballot? If the current system is not broke, why do we want to fix it? There's a small group of people, bar associations, who used to have a tremendous amount of say-so and who became a judge, who don't have that say-so anymore. And that's the push behind the issue of this selection process. I haven't ever heard anyone define merit as it applies to judges. I hear fairness, integrity, impartiality. Those are things we all understand. But that merit word, what does that mean? We were able to pass the sub-circuits in Springfield because it was a reaction to Gray Lord. There was a need for reform that was felt throughout Cook County and actually throughout the state. And the answer to that was the sub-circuits. Since they've been in place, there is no longer in the general public a push for reform, a need for reform. The reform I hear is really just change. We want to change the selectors. Right now, the selectors are the general public, and people want to change them to selectors where a small group will have more control. So if there was a clamor to put it on the ballot, the people in Springfield, if they don't do anything else, they respond to the pressure they get back home. There's nobody back home pressuring them to change the way judges are elected.
Okay, and let me just put on my former hat for a second. I spent a lot of years in the news business, and I will just tell you that the public, the judiciary is an invisible branch of government to the public. We don't have cameras in the courtroom, so no one sees what goes on in a courtroom unless they're a defendant or a participant in the legal process. And so the lack of clamor, I would argue, is not because we don't need change. We may or may not. But I think it's that people just don't know anything about how the judiciary works. I will just give you two statistics that tell me that the system needs some work. 85 men, mostly minorities, have spent more than 900 years in prison in this state because they were wrongly convicted of violent crimes. In many of those cases, it was the fault of prosecutors and police and forensic people, but in many, many of those cases, judges made those calls that put people behind bars for almost 1,000 years. Secondarily, a BGA investigation a couple years ago actually revealed that an awful lot of judges don't believe that they ought to be working a full day for a day's pay. Courtrooms sit empty from noon on as bailiffs on full salary sit there waiting for something to happen. So I would only say that the lack of a clamor for change is driven as much by a lack of knowledge of the system and what its potential problems are as it is by anything else. And secondarily, we have many problems that are hitting us right across the head more viscerally, whether it's a school strike or murders in the street or a recession or joblessness. And so the functioning of a branch of government is far down on that list of priorities. I think that's as important as the question of whether things are, it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, we don't know that it ain't broke because we don't see it very carefully. I would just make that observation. Let me pivot to money for a little bit before we take these questions and ask you, first and foremost, this would be an opinion I'd love from each of you, what needs to change in this whole way in which we finance these campaigns? I know there are a lot of people who think we should publicly finance at least the Supreme Court races, but when I saw those statistics on the Kilbride race and the Burke race and the one you referred to a few years ago, and saw how much of that money comes from people who might end up right in front of those judges, that was deeply troubling to a good government group. Conflicts are a bad thing. So what should we be looking at on that financial front or the recusal front to try to at least make the current system less conflict prone? John, you want to start, John?
Sure. Well, the challenge that we face in the influence of money in the judiciary only got worse with the Citizens United U.S. Supreme Court case. It only made it more difficult for us to confront this perception that judges are influenced by contributions. And so it is, there's just no question that it's a problem. Now, as long as we have elected judges, we've got to have a system for financing these campaigns. And if we don't have public financing, they will be soliciting, or their campaigns will be soliciting. Now, some are very good about putting blinders on, such that they don't know who their contributors are. And I really believe I know enough very earnest judges that are very careful about not trying to find that out. Others want to know every single name, and they do it for a good reason, because they want to be able to reject a contribution from someone that they don't want to be aligned with. So if you're going to have an elective system, you're going to have to finance it. If you don't have public financing, they're going to have to raise money. So the next step is what we've been mentioning off and on, is under what circumstances should a judge recuse him or herself based on the question of campaign financing. And there are a number of systems that have been adopted in different states. Our committee is looking at these different systems, and I expect that what we're going to have is a proposed rule that's going to create a list of factors that a judge should take into account in making a decision as to whether a lawful contribution, perhaps combined with other variables, gets to the point where where a reasonable person would conclude that there would be a perception of bias. So those are the sorts of things that I think we can do in the.
You want that to be a law passed by the legislature?
No, it wouldn't. It would be through the Supreme Court. Supreme Court would modify.
They promulgate a rule.
Correct. That's
okay.
Right.
Can I just? I mean, that's one way. But how about taking it from the other point of view, which is to say that anyone who is going to have involvement in the court system is barred from contributing to a campaign, in the same way that a lot of politicians and a lot of governmental entities don't allow their elected officials to receive contributions from contractors who are doing business with that branch of government. Why not impose the same rule here? If you're going to do business with the courts, you can't give money to the people who run the courts.
Yeah, I think that would be an ideal, but it also discredits those that really do want to support people who they know to be good judges. And there are plenty of contributions that come from folks who are the best at knowing who's good and who's not good, and those are the lawyers. And so to have an outright rule that would prohibit the kind of contribution, and these are not generally large dollar contributions, but that anybody in the general public could make, I would not be in favor of.
Yeah, as you were answering, I was thinking what a ridiculous question that was. I've been out of the news business too long. I'm starting to ask the dumber questions. Because obviously, if you preclude anybody in the system from giving money, the money's only going to come from people who don't know anything about the system. Anthony Young, do you think we ought to do anything?
Starting from the premise, lawyers are best to evaluate a judge is presupposing the conclusion that you're going to arrive at. I disagree with that premise. I don't think that lawyers are the best judges.
Okay, well, hang on. That's fine. Let's finish this round, though. Anthony Young, do you think we ought to do anything about money, the skin in the game?
I think at the circuit court level, because there's so many circuit court judges.
And there are limits, by the way, at the lower levels. 175,000 and 100 in Cook and 100 in the others.
I don't think there needs to be any changes in the financing laws or financing practices for what goes on at the circuit court level. I think as far as the Supreme Court goes, that the only answer is public financing, to take the appearance. And I say appearance because I believe all those gentlemen are honorable gentlemen, and they try not to give influence to their contributors. But if you have to run for election, if your opponent is raising money, you have to do the same thing, and it becomes a cycle. And the way to end that, so I would support public financing at the Supreme Court level, but not at any other level.
And Brian, you touched on it in your opening remarks. If you were writing the legislation that would reduce the influence of money or the potential for conflicts as money flows to the system, what would you be doing?
So, I mean, I think that the core issue that we're having here is about how judges are making decisions, and do they have to listen to special interests or not. And I think that whether it's a merit selection or something else, I think this gets to be the core issue. And we've seen this term, activist judges. We're starting to see that decisions are being made by special interests to put millions of dollars into campaigns based on if you're on the right or if you're on the left, if you are a conservative judge or if you're a liberal judge. And judges now can actively go out and put those stances out there. And so political ads are actually helping to drive some of the decisions of who are judges and not the performance of a judge. And so a public financing system is something that we really need to see. People are familiar with the Avery case versus State Farm. That's another example of a lot of money being influenced by a judge that should be recusing themselves right during election time. And another piece that we're interested in looking at, not only for the judiciary but also for the legislative and executive branch, is small donations. And really saying it's really hard with Citizens United to say that there shouldn't be money in politics because the Supreme Court says that that's a First Amendment right. But if we started to say the problem is that judges and our elected officials are potentially have to look at who is giving them money, and if we put into a system where $100 or $150 goes to a judge, if I did that, I don't believe a judge is going to care as much. New York City has a really good small donor match program, 6-to-1. $175 goes to an elected official or an alderman, then it gets matched 6-to-1 by a pot of public financing. So if we have systems like that, that limits and starts to engage people into being participatory in their government in a way that gets us to more independency and more what we're talking about tonight than I think anything else in the moment.
Gino, DiVito, on the assumption that we're not going to have merit selection in the near future, what would you do about the flow of money through the judicial process? If you could wave a magic wand, what would happen?
I'll answer that, except let me preface it by saying that the power of money and the necessity of money is another strong argument against the current system. Because these judges who are running as though they're regular politicians need to do what regular politicians do. They need to get the word out. The reason why they need to raise so much money is because they've got to be on television to convince the people to share with the people their background. Because once the people know about their background, they will certainly prevail. And every candidate feels that. You know, it's the only way that I have to get a message out. News reporters aren't covering elections, so we get ads. And right now, that's happening only at the Supreme Court level. Eventually, it's going to start happening at the appellate court level and even the circuit court level, because if you have enough money and you can afford television, that's going to occur. Your question about the cure, okay, we've got limits in Illinois. Individuals can contribute $5,000 to a candidate's campaign, but an individual and his spouse, his brother-in-law and his cousin and other people that you bundle, of course, can add dramatically to those amounts. There are no limits concerning so-called independent contributions. That's Citizen United. Absolutely no limit. The one cure, as indicated by a Seventh Circuit decision yesterday, which is consistent with every court, to my knowledge, that's ruled on the issue, is having legislation which requires disclosure of people who are contributing to these PACs, revealing the identity of the people who are contributing so as to have some impact on these elections. But, you know, the bottom line is that the need to raise money is the way to get elected, and the evil, the danger of that is self-evident. This affects the independence of the judiciary. This affects the perception of the citizenry regarding judges and why they're making the rulings they're making in connection with certain litigants or lawyers appearing before them. The campaign money is the lifeblood of our election system. And we can't curtail it. We know that from Citizens United. We can place limits on contributions to an individual's campaign, but not these other independent operatives, the PACs and all of these, the issue-oriented groups who speak to an issue and either try to resurrect a client or demean a client based on where that, I shouldn't say client, a candidate, based on where that candidate stands on an issue.
Okay. Let me do this. If somebody wants to add something, fine. But let me go through. Let me take some of the audience questions now, and rather than, again, if you know the answer and you want to answer, go ahead. If you don't feel any need. We don't need 4 answers to every question. The first one is right out of the conversation we're just having. Is there any indication that the PACs and the super PACs have influenced any of the judicial races in Illinois in the last couple of years, post-Citizen United? Do we have any evidence of that or any indication that it played a role in any of these campaigns yet?
I think the answer is no. We don't have any evidence of any of them having influenced elections, but we're getting a preview of what is to come, and come in a very, very major way.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Let me just,
sure.
I foreshadowed this earlier, and I'll do it quickly. Those of you familiar with what happened in Iowa, you had outside groups that came in. They were a political action committee. There was one in particular that was the Newt Gingrich committee that came in, and you had a very motivated group. You had a retention system that was set up to be a perfect storm. You had an issue that was galvanizing. It was same-sex marriage, if you remember. You had the system was the tradition was that judges did not raise a lot of money for the retention campaigns. They would try to stay above it. And so, as a result, as I mentioned before, you had this decision by these three judges that was acclaimed by everybody who knew anything about who understood the Constitution and what they were ruling on, and they got thrown out, all because of the impact of the enormous amounts of money.
So you're suggesting that it's only a matter of time before we see it here in some capacity, perhaps.
That is right.
Let me switch to another one that I found interesting, another great audience question. This is back to the ballot issue rather than the money issue, and that is, would we take a step forward? Let's say, again, that Merritt is not coming to Illinois in the near future. Would it be a step forward to make all the judicial elections nonpartisan, as many mayoral races are? In other words, you don't run as a Democrat through the Cook County Democratic Party. You run as a candidate for judge in the sub-circuit or the circuit or countywide or whatever, and everybody runs. You run in a nonpartisan primary and or a nonpartisan election as opposed to through the standard party-based election system. Anybody have a thought on that?
Have you read my article on that topic?
I might have missed it, Gino. I apologize. I'll read it before bed tonight.
I wrote an article for the Illinois Bar Journal on that very issue. The reality is that we're electing people at the primary elections, not at the general elections. Where the winner of a primary election of the predominant party automatically wins in the general election. So the result of that is that, for example, in Cook County, Democrats are electing judges in the primary election. In sub-circuits, depending on which is the primary party, Republican or Democrat, winning the primary election is tantamount to winning the election. Downstate, a Republican primary election determines the winner in most areas, not all. So, you know, we're allowing only those voters who vote in the primary of the predominant party to elect judges. Why don't we have an election